The memory of stars. The woman's face emerges from the dust, like a pale moon breaking through storm clouds, blood trickling from her temple in a crimson line that disappears into sun-bleached hair. Jake Holloway reins in his horse so hard the animal rears, hooves pawing at air that tastes of sage and distant rain. She lies motionless beside the overturned stagecoach, her fine blue dress torn and muddied, one delicate hand clutching at nothing, while the other rests palm up like she's reaching for stars that fell too far to catch. "Jesus," he whispers, dismounting in one fluid motion that speaks of 30 years in the saddle. The wreckage tells its story in splintered wood and scattered belongings, a jewelry box split open, pearls scattered like tears across the hard-packed earth. The horses are gone, either dead or spooked into the vastness of the New Mexico territory, leaving only the buzz of flies and the woman's shallow breathing to disturb the desert silence. Jake drops to his knees beside her, calloused hands hovering uncertainly over her still form. She's beautiful in a way that makes his chest tight, like looking at something too precious for a broken-down cowhand to touch. Her skin is pale as fresh snow, unmarked by sun or hardship, and her clothes speak of money, real money, the kind that builds empires and crushes men like him without a second thought. "Ma'am," his voice comes out rougher than intended, gravelly from years of shouting over cattle and wind. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids flutter, revealing eyes the color of winter sky, confused and empty as a child's. She tries to speak, but only a soft whimper escapes her lips. When she attempts to sit up, Jake's hands move instinctively to steady her, and she doesn't pull away, just stares at him with those lost, beautiful eyes. "Easy now," he murmurs, the same tone he uses with spooked horses. "You're safe, I'm not gonna hurt you." But even as he says it, Jake knows that safety is relative out here, where the nearest town is a hard day's ride, and the desert keeps its own brutal calendar of survival. Jake Holloway is 32 years old and has been running from civilization for the better part of a decade. His face carries the map of those years, weathered bronze skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, crow's feet carved deep by squinting into too many sunsets, a scar threading white through his left eyebrow where a Mustang's hoof caught him careless. His hands tell their own story of rope burns and broken bones, gentle now as they check the woman for injuries, but capable of violence when necessity calls. 6 months ago, he buried his younger brother Tommy in the cemetery outside Alamogordo, another victim of the fever that swept through the territory like God's own wrath. Tommy had been the only family Jake had left, the only reason he'd stayed in one place long enough to call it home. Now he drifts between ranches, hiring his gun and his skill with horses to whoever needs them, carrying everything he owns in the saddlebags of a paint horse named Dusty. The cabin where he brings the woman sits in a box canyon 20 miles from the nearest settlement, a place he's been wintering the past 3 years. It's crude but solid, thick adobe walls that keep out the cold, a stone fireplace that draws clean, and a well that runs sweet even in the dry months. He built it with his own hands after Tommy died, needing something permanent to anchor him to a world that seemed to shift like sand under his feet. "What's your name?" he asks, as he helps her from his horse, but she only stares at him with that same lost expression. Inside the cabin, he settles her on his own bed, the only furniture besides a rough table and 2 chairs he carved himself. She winces when he touches the gash on her temple, and her confusion seems deeper than simple injury, like looking into a well and finding no bottom. I can't." Her voice is cultured, educated, with just a hint of an accent he can't place. "Where am I? Who are you?" "Name's Jake. Jake Holloway. You're in New Mexico territory, about a day's ride southeast of Roswell." He brings her water in a tin cup, watches her hands shake as she lifts it to her lips. "Do you remember the stagecoach? There was an accident." She shakes her head slowly, wincing at the movement. "I don't remember anything. Not the coach, not—" Her eyes fill with tears that make them even more beautiful and heartbreaking. "I don't remember my own name." Jake has seen men with head injuries before, watched cowboys thrown from broncs who couldn't remember their own mothers for weeks afterward. But this woman's confusion runs deeper, like someone pulled out every thread that connected her to herself and left only empty holes where memories should be. Memory might come back, he says, surprising himself with how much he wants to comfort her. Sometimes takes time after a knock to the head. She nods, trusting in a way that makes his chest tighten. "Thank you for helping me." The desert winter settles around them like a held breath, cold and still and waiting. Jake tends her injury with the careful attention he'd give a wounded animal, cleaning the cut with whiskey that makes her gasp and bandaging it with strips torn from his cleanest shirt. She doesn't remember her name, so he starts calling her Sarah, the name of a school teacher he knew back in Kansas who had the same kind of gentle strength. Days pass in a rhythm as old as survival itself. Jake chops wood and checks his snares while Sarah sits by the window, staring out at the endless sky like she's waiting for something to come riding over the horizon with answers. She helps where she can, stirring the fire, preparing simple meals, mending his shirts with stitches so small and perfect they could have been done by fairy hands. "You know how to sew," he observes one evening, watching her work by lamplight. Sarah pauses, needle halfway through the fabric. Yes, I suppose I do." She looks at her hands like they belong to someone else. "It feels natural, but I can't remember learning." They discover things about her in pieces. She can read Latin and speak what sounds like French. She knows which fork to use for which course at a fancy dinner. She can play piano, though Jake doesn't own one to prove it. Everything about her speaks of education and privilege, a world as far from his rough cabin as the moon from Earth. But she also knows how to bank a fire to last through the night, how to tell when meat is properly cooked, how to fold laundry so it won't wrinkle. Practical skills that suggest a woman who's lived, not just been decorative. When she laughs at something he says, a rare surprise sound like water over stones, Jake feels something in his chest that's been frozen since Tommy died start to crack and warm. The nearest settlement is Esperanza, a struggling town that clings to existence like a tick on a dying dog. Jake rides in once a week for supplies, always hoping someone might have word about a missing woman, a stagecoach that didn't arrive, anything that might give Sarah back her past. But week after week, he returns empty-handed, and if he's honest with himself, each time the relief outweighs the disappointment. Father Miguel runs the church and tends to anyone who needs healing, a small dark man with gentle hands and eyes that see too much. When Jake finally brings Sarah to town in late February, hoping the priest might have heard something, Miguel takes one look at her and crosses himself. "Dios mío," he whispers, "she is hurt badly." "Head injury," Jake explains, helping Sarah down from the horse. "Lost her memory. I've been caring for her, but I thought, maybe you'd heard something. Someone looking for a missing woman." Miguel examines Sarah with professional competence, checking her pupils, testing her reflexes, asking gentle questions she can't answer. Finally he shakes his head. "The injury heals well," he pronounces, "but the memory, sometimes it returns, sometimes not. God has his reasons." He looks between them with those two knowing eyes. She is welcome here, if she wishes to stay. The church has room. Sarah's hand finds Jake's arm, fingers pressing through the fabric of his sleeve. "I'd rather stay with Jake, if that's all right. He's been kind." The word kind seems insufficient for what's grown between them through the long winter nights, conversations by firelight, shared meals, the comfortable silence of two people who fit together like pieces of a puzzle neither knew they were solving. Jake wants to protect that fragile piece, to keep her safe in his small cabin where the world can't reach them. But Esperanza is a small town with narrow minds and long memories. Within days, tongues start wagging about the cowboy and the mysterious woman living in sin up in the canyon. Jake hears the whispers when he comes to town, sees the way people look at Sarah like she's something dangerous and exotic. "It ain't proper," declares Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of community morals. "A unmarried woman living with a man like that. What kind of example does it set?" "Maybe they're married," suggests young Tom Bradshaw, but Mrs. Henderson snorts. "Look at her clothes, boy. Look at the way she talks. That's quality, that is." "And him?" She jerks her chin toward Jake. "Nothing but a drifter with a gun. Mark my words, no good will come of this." The pressure builds through March like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. People start asking questions Jake can't answer. Where did she come from? Why was she on that stagecoach? Why hasn't anyone come looking for her? The suspicion spreads like wildfire in dry grass, fed by fear of the unknown and the human need to find simple explanations for complex mysteries. Sarah feels it too, the weight of their scrutiny and judgment. She grows quiet and withdrawn, spending long hours staring out at the desert as if searching for something she's lost. When Jake touches her hand one evening, she pulls away. "Maybe I should go," she says, voice barely above a whisper. "Find somewhere else to start over." "Where?" Jake's voice comes out harsher than he intends. "You don't remember anything about your past. At least here you're safe." "Am I?" She turns to face him and he sees the fear in her eyes. They look at me like I'm some kind of criminal, like I'm dangerous. People fear what they don't understand. Give them time, but time is a luxury they don't have. 3 days later, Sheriff Coleman rides out to the cabin with a warrant in his hand and trouble written across his weather-beaten face. "Jake," he says, not dismounting. "I need to talk to the lady." "About what?" Jake's hand rests casually near his gun, but Coleman's been sheriff for 15 years and recognizes the signs. "Had a telegraph from Santa Fe. Seems there's been a murder down that way, and a woman matching her description was seen leaving town on the stagecoach that day." Coleman's eyes never leave Sarah, who's emerged from the cabin pale as a ghost. "I'm gonna have to ask her some questions." Sarah sways on her feet, one hand pressed to her throat. "Murder?" she whispers. "Now I ain't saying she done anything," Coleman continues. "But there's questions need answering. Why don't you come into town, miss? We'll get this sorted out proper." Jake steps between them, broad shoulders blocking the sheriff's view of Sarah. "She can't answer questions she don't remember." Doc Miguel looked at her, said the head injury was severe. "She don't remember her own name, let alone anything about Santa Fe." "That's convenient," Coleman says, but his tone is gentle. He's known Jake for years, trusts him as much as he trusts anyone. "Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but people are talking and I've got a job to do. Bring her in tomorrow morning. We'll ask some questions, send a telegraph back to Santa Fe. Maybe clear this whole thing up." After he leaves, Jake and Sarah sit in silence as the sun sets behind the canyon walls. The future stretches ahead of them like a rope with a noose at the end, and Jake can feel everything they've built together starting to crumble. "What if I did do something terrible?" Sarah asks finally. "What if that's why I can't remember? What if my mind is protecting me from something awful?" Jake reaches for her hand, relief flooding through him when she doesn't pull away. "I know you," he says firmly. "I've seen how you treat injured animals, how gentle you are with everything you touch. Whatever happened in Santa Fe, it wasn't murder. I'd stake my life on it." But even as he says the words, Jake can feel doubt creeping in like cold through a broken window. How well does he really know her? Memory or no memory? What if the woman he's fallen in love with isn't who he thinks she is? The night passes slowly, both of them lying awake but pretending to sleep. When dawn finally breaks over the desert, it brings with it the sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Jake is at the window with his rifle before the last echo fades. "Posse," he says grimly. 6 men, maybe 7. Sarah joins him at the window, her face carved from marble. "They've come to arrest me, over my dead body." But Sarah shakes her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "I won't have you die for me, Jake Holloway. If I'm guilty of something, I need to face it." The riders surround the cabin, weapons drawn but not aimed. Sheriff Coleman sits his horse in the center, his face grim as winter. "Come out peaceable," he calls. "Both of you, hands where I can see them." Jake emerges first, rifle held loose in his hands, not threatening, but not surrendering either. Sarah follows, head held high despite the circumstances, and Jake has never been more proud of anyone in his life. "Ma'am," Coleman says, touching his hat. "I'm placing you under arrest for questioning in connection with the murder of Harold Pemberton in Santa Fe. You have the right to remain silent." "Who is Harold Pemberton?" Sarah asks, genuine confusion in her voice. "Your husband," Coleman replies, and the words hit Jake like a physical blow. "According to the telegram, you're Mrs. Catherine Pemberton. Married 3 years ago in Boston. Your husband was found shot dead in his hotel room the day you disappeared." Sarah staggers, one hand pressed to her heart. "Husband," she whispers. I'm married." The world tilts sideways, and Jake feels everything he thought he knew sliding away like sand through his fingers. Sarah Catherine is married, was married, and her husband is dead, possibly by her hand. "That's impossible," Jake says, but even as he speaks, he can see the recognition dawning in Sarah's eyes. Memory returning like floodwater, destroying everything in its path. "I remember," she whispers, tears streaming down her face. "Oh God, I remember." The ride to Esperanza passes in a blur of dust and anguish. Sarah, Catherine, sits behind Coleman on his horse, her hands bound but her dignity intact. Jake follows on Dusty, his world crumbling around him like a house built on sand. In town, they lock Catherine in the small jail cell behind the sheriff's office, while Coleman sends telegraphs to Santa Fe and waits for instructions. Jake paces outside like a caged wolf, ignoring the curious stares of townspeople who've gathered to gawk at the drama. Father Miguel appears at his elbow, small and solid as a boulder. "She will need a lawyer," the priest says quietly. "With what money?" Jake's voice is bitter as alkali water. "I've got maybe $40 to my name. Then she will need friends, people who believe in her innocence." Jake stops pacing, turns to stare at the priest. "You think she's innocent?" Miguel shrugs, a gesture that encompasses worlds of uncertainty. "I think innocence and guilt are more complicated than most people believe. I think she has suffered enough, whatever her crimes. And I think you love her." "She's married," Jake says, the words tasting like ashes. "Her husband is dead, and love does not ask permission before it takes root in the heart." Through the barred window of her cell, Catherine sits on the narrow cot with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall as if she can see through it to a past that's finally returned to claim her. When Jake approaches the window, she looks up with eyes full of pain and memory. "Tell me," he says simply. Catherine's voice is steady, but her hands shake as she speaks. "Harold Pemberton was my husband. An arranged marriage. My father owed him money, and I was the collateral. He was cruel, Jake. Not just unkind, but truly cruel. He enjoyed hurting people, especially those who couldn't fight back." She pauses, gathering strength for the worst of it. "He killed my brother. Thomas was only 16, and Harold shot him down like a dog for trying to protect me. Made it look like an accident, but I knew. I always knew." Jake's hands grip the window bars so tight, his knuckles turn white. "So you shot him?" "No." Her voice is firm, certain. "I couldn't. Even knowing what he'd done, even hating him with every breath in my body, I couldn't pull the trigger. I ran instead. Took what money I could find and bought passage on the first stagecoach heading west. I wanted to disappear, to become someone else. Someone who'd never been Harold Pemberton's wife." "Then who killed him?" Catherine's smile is sad and knowing. "Harold Pemberton made enemies everywhere he went. It could have been anyone, a business partner he cheated, a woman he ruined, a father whose daughter he destroyed. The only reason they suspect me is because I ran. But running from a monster doesn't make you a murderer." Jake believes her. Looking into her eyes, seeing the pain and honesty there, he knows with absolute certainty that Catherine Pemberton is innocent of her husband's murder. But proving it will be another matter entirely. The next 3 days stretch like years. Telegraph messages fly back and forth between Esperanza and Santa Fe, carrying accusations and demands for Catherine's return. The town divides into factions, those who believe the worst about the mysterious woman, and those who've seen her kindness firsthand. Henderson leads the charge for immediate extradition, declaring loudly in the general store that murder will out and that decent people shouldn't be fooled by a pretty face. But Dr. Sarah Whitman, the town's only female physician, speaks just as loudly in Catherine's defense. "I've examined her," Dr. Whitman announces during an impromptu town meeting in the church. "That head injury was severe, severe enough to cause genuine amnesia, and I've seen how she interacts with people. That woman couldn't kill a spider, let alone a man." Young Tom Bradshaw, barely 18 but old enough to vote, stands up in the back. Maybe her husband deserved killing. Maybe whoever done it was just giving him what was coming. The meeting erupts in arguments and accusations, voices raised in anger and fear. Father Miguel finally calls for order, his quiet authority cutting through the chaos. "We are not judges," he reminds them. "We are neighbors called to show mercy and seek justice. If this woman is innocent, then our duty is to protect her. If she is guilty, then our duty is to ensure she receives a fair trial. But we cannot decide her fate based on fear and prejudice." Jake sits in the back, watching the debate rage around him. Part of him wants to bust Catherine out of jail and ride with her into Mexico, where they could start over with new names and clean slates. But he knows she's too honorable to run again, and he's too honorable to make her an outlaw for love. On the 4th day, a stranger rides into town, a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, who identifies himself as Detective Marcus Walsh from the Santa Fe Police Department. He's come to escort Catherine back for trial, but first he wants to investigate the circumstances of her disappearance. Jake watches from across the street as Walsh interviews Catherine through the cell bars, his questions sharp and probing. The detective's face reveals nothing, but something in his manner suggests he's not entirely convinced of her guilt. That evening, Walsh seeks Jake out at the saloon, sliding into the chair across from him without invitation. "You're the one who found her," Walsh says, signaling the bartender for whiskey. "That's right, tell me about it. Everything you remember." Jake studies the detective's face, looking for signs of prejudice or predetermined conclusions. Finding none, he tells the story from the beginning: the overturned stagecoach, Catherine's injuries, her complete memory loss. Walsh listens without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather book. "The stagecoach," Walsh says finally. "You said it looked like an accident. Could have been. That stretch of road is dangerous, lots of rocks, steep drop-offs." But Jake hesitates, then plunges ahead. "Looking back, it might have been bandits. The horses were gone, and there was no sign of other passengers or luggage except what was scattered around." Walsh's pen stops moving. "What kind of luggage?" "Ladies' things mostly. Jewelry box, some clothes. Like someone was looking for something specific and threw away what they didn't want." The detective leans forward, suddenly intense. "Did you keep any of it? Any evidence from the scene?" Jake shakes his head. "Didn't think of it as evidence at the time. Just seemed like a woman who needed help." But even as he says it, Jake remembers something else, a detail he'd forgotten in the shock of finding Catherine. There had been another set of tracks near the wreckage, boot prints too large to belong to a woman. At the time, he'd assumed they belonged to the driver, but now, there was someone else there, he says suddenly. "Before I arrived, male based on the tracks. Could have been the driver, but the prints were too fresh. Like someone had been there just before me and left in a hurry." Walsh's eyes sharpen. "Could you find the spot again? Show me exactly where you found her." "In the dark, with my eyes closed." "But what good will it do? That was 4 months ago. Desert preserves things, and I'm very good at reading what the land has to say." They ride out at dawn, Jake leading Walsh to the canyon where he first found Catherine. The wreckage is long gone. Jake had burned it weeks ago, but the land still bears the scars of the crash. Walsh dismounts and begins a careful examination of the ground, moving in widening circles like a bloodhound, following a scent. After an hour, he calls Jake over to a spot near some boulders. "Look at this." The detective points to what remains of a small campfire, mostly buried by wind and sand, but still visible to a trained eye. Nearby, Jake can make out the faint impression of where someone had bedded down for the night. "Someone waited here," Walsh explains. "Could have been for hours, maybe days. Good vantage point. You can see the road for miles in both directions." He stands, brushing dirt from his knees. "This wasn't random. Someone knew that stagecoach was coming, and exactly when it would pass this spot." Jake feels a cold knot forming in his stomach. "You're saying Catherine was set up?" "I'm saying someone wanted Harold Pemberton's wife to disappear. Question is whether they wanted her dead, or just gone." Walsh mounts his horse, already planning his next move. "I need to send some telegraphs. And I think we need to have another conversation with Mrs. Pemberton." Back in town, Walsh requests a private meeting with Catherine, Jake and Father Miguel serving as witnesses. Catherine sits on the edge of her cot, composure intact despite the strain of the past few days. "Mrs. Pemberton," Walsh begins, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about the day you left Santa Fe. Every detail, no matter how small." Catherine closes her eyes, concentrating. "I had been planning to leave for weeks, ever since Harold killed Thomas. I waited for the right opportunity, when he would be gone long enough for me to get away clean. He had a business meeting that morning, something about a mining claim. I thought he'd be gone all day. But he came back early? No, I don't think so. I left the house around noon, took the 2 o'clock stagecoach. Harold was supposed to be at his meeting until evening." Her brow furrows as she tries to remember. "But now that I think about it, there was something strange. At the stage station, a man approached me, said he was a friend of Harold's, asked if I was Mrs. Pemberton." Walsh leans forward. "Describe him." "Tall, thin, with a mustache. Well-dressed, but not elegant, like a successful businessman who'd started life as a laborer. He had scars on his hands, and he kept touching his hat, like he was nervous." "What did he say?" "Just asked if I was traveling alone, how far I was going. I told him I was visiting family in Albuquerque. I didn't want anyone to know my real destination." He seemed satisfied with that answer, like it was what he wanted to hear. Walsh and Jake exchange glances. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to form a picture, and it's not one that implicates Catherine in her husband's murder. "Mrs. Pemberton," The detective says gently, "I believe you were meant to die in that stagecoach accident. Someone hired men to ambush the coach and make sure you never reached your destination. Your amnesia probably saved your life. They assumed you were dead and didn't bother to confirm it." Catherine's face goes white. "But why? Who would want me dead?" "Someone who benefited from both you and your husband being out of the way. Someone who knew about Harold's business dealings and your travel plans." Walsh stands, his mind already working ahead to the next phase of his investigation. "I need to return to Santa Fe immediately. There are records to examine, witnesses to interview, but I'm recommending that all charges against you be dropped pending further investigation." "You mean I'm free?" Catherine's voice is barely a whisper. "You were never guilty, ma'am. Just unlucky enough to be married to a man who made the wrong enemies." The news spreads through Esperanza like wildfire. Within hours, the entire town knows that Catherine Pemberton has been cleared of murder charges, that she was the intended victim rather than the perpetrator. The shift in public opinion is swift and dramatic. Those who had whispered accusations now speak loudly of her courage and resilience. Mrs. Henderson, never one to admit error gracefully, sniffs that she always knew there was more to the story, while Dr. Whitman simply smiles and goes back to her patients. Young Tom Bradshaw organizes a collection to help Catherine get back on her feet, and even the taciturn bartender at the saloon contributes $1 to the fund. But for all the community support and vindication, Catherine sits in Jake's cabin that evening with the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her memory has returned completely now, bringing with it the full knowledge of her past, the arranged marriage, her brother's death, the years of abuse and fear. She is free from accusations of murder, but she is not free from the ghosts that haunt her. "What happens now?" she asks, staring into the fire. Jake sits across from her, close enough to touch but suddenly feeling like there are miles between them. "I suppose you'll go back east, claim your inheritance, start over. Harold left everything to his business partner in the event of our deaths. The will was very specific about that. If I'm alive, I get nothing." Her laugh is bitter. "He made sure of that even in death. Then stay here, stay with me." The words hang between them like a bridge, neither is sure they can cross. Catherine looks at him with eyes full of love and sorrow. "I'm damaged goods, Jake. I've been another man's wife, lived through things that changed me in ways I can't undo. You deserve better than someone else's broken pieces." Jake moves to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. "I've been broken too, lost my brother, lost my way, spent years drifting like a tumbleweed with no place to call home. You didn't heal me, you helped me heal myself, and maybe I can do the same for you." People will talk, a widow and a cowboy, no proper courtship, no family approval, let them talk. "I've got money saved up, enough to buy a small spread, build something real. We could raise horses, maybe cattle, make a life that's ours and nobody else's." Catherine pulls her hands free, stands and walks to the window. Outside, the desert stretches endlessly under a canopy of stars, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. It's a land that demands honesty, that strips away pretense and reveals the truth of what people are beneath their facades. "My name isn't Sarah," she says finally. "It's Catherine. Catherine Elizabeth Morrison Pemberton. I'm 26 years old, I speak 3 languages, I can play piano and manage a household of 20 servants. I'm afraid of thunderstorms, and I have nightmares about my brother's death. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone, but I don't know if love is enough to build a life on." Jake joins her at the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass beside hers. "My name is Jacob William Holloway. I'm 32 years old. I can track a deer through solid rock and gentle the wildest Mustang. I lost my brother to fever and my parents to smallpox, and I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to belong somewhere. I love you too, Catherine Elizabeth Morrison Pemberton. And maybe love isn't enough by itself, but it's a damn good place to start." She turns to face him, and in her eyes he sees the same mixture of hope and fear that's been churning in his own chest. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jake Holloway?" "I'm asking you to marry me, to build something with me, to take whatever broken pieces we both have and see if we can fit them together into something whole." He reaches up to touch her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "I'm asking you to trust me with your tomorrow, and I'm promising to trust you with mine." Catherine's smile starts small and grows like sunrise, transforming her face from beautiful to radiant. "Yes," she whispers, "yes to all of it." 3 weeks later, Father Miguel performs the wedding ceremony in the small church in Esperanza, with half the town in attendance and the other half lurking outside trying to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. Catherine wears a simple blue dress that Dr. Whitman helped her choose, and Jake has traded his usual worn denim for a proper suit that makes him look like a stranger to himself. Detective Walsh has returned from Santa Fe with news that Harold Pemberton's business partner has confessed to arranging both murders, hiring bandits to kill Catherine, and personally shooting Harold when the man grew suspicious of his activities. The case is closed, Catherine's name completely cleared, and she is free to build whatever future she chooses. Tom Bradshaw serves as Jake's best man, grinning from ear to ear as he hands over the ring, a simple gold band that Jake had made by the town's blacksmith. Dr. Whitman stands as Catherine's matron of honor, and even Mrs. Henderson admits that the bride looks quite lovely, considering the circumstances. As they exchange vows, promising to love and honor and protect each other through whatever trials life might bring, Jake thinks about the woman who fell into his life like a shooting star, mysterious and beautiful and dangerous in all the best ways. Catherine thinks about the man who saw her broken and lost and chose to offer shelter instead of judgment, who gave her space to heal and the courage to remember who she was beneath the fear. They are both starting over, building new lives from the ashes of their old ones. It won't be easy. The desert is harsh, the work is hard, and there will always be people who whisper about the cowboy and the widow who found love in tragedy. But they have each other now, and the promise of tomorrow, and the knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unlikely places. After the ceremony, as the sun sets behind the mountains and the celebration moves to the saloon, Jake and Catherine steal a quiet moment on the church steps. The future stretches ahead of them like an uncharted territory, full of possibilities and challenges, and the daily miracle of choosing each other again and again. "No regrets?" Jake asks, his arm around her waist. Catherine leans against him, solid and warm and real. "Not a one, you, only that it took a stagecoach accident to bring you to me. But I reckon even the longest journey's worthwhile if it leads you home." Above them, the stars wheel in their ancient patterns, witnesses to countless stories of love found and lost and found again. In the distance, coyotes sing their wild songs to the moon, and the desert wind carries the scent of sage and possibility. It's the beginning of their story together, written in a land that keeps its own harsh beauty and demands nothing less than everything from those brave enough to call it home. The memory of stars fades in the dawn light, but the love they found beneath them burns steady and true, a flame that will warm them through whatever winters lie ahead. They are Jacob and Catherine Holloway now, no longer broken pieces but something new and strong, built to last in a world that tests everything and keeps only what's worth keeping. And in the small town of Esperanza, where hope sometimes comes disguised as tragedy, and love sometimes requires the courage to forget everything you thought you knew about yourself, their story becomes part of the larger story of the desert itself, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, but capable of sustaining those strong enough to bloom where they're planted, and wise enough to know that home isn't a place you find, but something you build with your own hands and heart. The end of their beginning has become the beginning of everything else, and the stars that witnessed their first meeting now bless their new union with the promise that some things are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth building a life around. In a land where water is precious and shade is salvation, they have found both in each other, and that is enough. That is everything.